So I worked at Nintendo for about 9 years, and obviously I had a blast. I mean, being able to work with Rare all that time, I worked on basically every game that came out of Nintendo of America to some level. Some I was producer, executive producer, some of the other producers in the studio were working on, but we all kind of played and helped and worked together. It was a pretty awesome experience. I also, I have just infinite respect for Mr. Arakawa and also Howard Lincoln. I mean, it was awesome to see them get the Lifetime Achievement Awards at DICE a couple weeks ago. Extremely well-deserved. I mean, if Mr. Arakawa hadn't left Nintendo, I'd probably still be there today. So, interesting set of circumstances happened that caused me to move to Microsoft. So Mr. Arakawa decides that he's going to retire. I had been playing the GameCube games, and they were good, right? I knew what was coming. I was very interested in online, and Nintendo had kind of a not-so-quite aggressive look at the online arena. More importantly to me, though, personally, I bought an Xbox on launch day. I buy every system on launch day. And I was playing it every night. And my GameCube was kind of sitting there. Again, partially because I'd already beaten all the good GameCube launch games before we even launched, but primarily just because the Xbox launch, I mean, Halo and Gotham especially. Gotham just completely addicted me to soundtracks and games. Halo, of course, was brilliant. It was funny. We were actually playing Halo 16-player LAN inside the treehouse at Nintendo. You know, it was just brilliant experience. And so I get this call from a guy that I used to work with at Nintendo, AJ Redmer. And he's like, so Mr. Arakawa retired? Yeah. Okay, that means it's time for you to come over and talk to us. And it's like, very astute. So he introduces me to Ed, who I'd met a couple times. And Ed sits down and tells me about this idea he has for a position that didn't exist at the time inside Microsoft. It was a portfolio planning director. So I was kind of looking at third and first party, deciding what we should be doing, you know, what should we be focusing our dev support on, marketing support, et cetera, et cetera. That was really fun for about 8 months, but while that 8 months went on, Ed was basically bringing me into all the meetings with all the internal studios and external partners about how their games are going, and I just like giving comments, so the comments come flowing. And after about 8 months, one of our one-on-one meetings, Ed's like, I think you want to run a studio again, don't you? It's like, yeah, that'd be cool. So we talked about it for a few hours, and in traditional Microsoft fashion, I interviewed. You know, so it was kind of funny, though, because the studio actually interviewed me. I interviewed a couple of their studio managers, but then the studio interviewed me to see if they'd actually like me, and that seemed to go over well because, bam, I had a studio. And little side story that maybe our PR people will frown at a little. You know, everything was all fine and rosy, and then Ed sits me down, and he's like, okay, your first job, ship Fable this year. It's like, ship Fable. Okay, well, I'm gonna go visit Lionhead, talk to Peter, see the game. And I came back, and it's like, I'd like to get 6 or 8 more months. We'll make the game phenomenal. You know, it was a long negotiation process, but it worked out good. And I think it also helped kick off. Obviously, there's no credit here on my part. Microsoft has always been very focused on the quality of the games and the quality of the partners we work on. But the way that MGS is run today versus the way it was run 5 years ago, I attribute a lot of it to Shane Kim and Phil Spencer, my boss. But also, I'd like to take a tiny bit of, when I came in, it was like, let's look really long and hard at the dates of the games we have based on how much of the time it'll make to take these to what need to be first-party quality games. And then let's look at the portfolio as a whole and think about, what's a first-party game versus what's a filler game. And if you look at our portfolio today, it's just this long list. I mean, this year, it's almost every month we have a first-party game coming out that really feels and acts the way a first-party game should. Show people on the hardware what they're doing. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. My studio went from maybe 1/6 or 1/8 of all the games being done inside Microsoft externally with publishers. About 2 years ago, we merged into 2 publishing studios, one run by me and one run by Bonnie Ross. She's an awesome longtime Microsoft person. Very, very smart when it comes to production. And my side has always been more creative. How can I throw ideas at the designers? I want to see what the cool new tech is going on the art side. And I've always loved game music. So about a year ago, Phil Spencer started talking to us, Bonnie and I, about the idea of maybe we merge into one big publishing group and take the roles that we are seemingly better at, but also more importantly enjoy more. So I took creative director role So where now I'm over all the designers inside publishing, all the artists, and all the audio support. I have about 25 people, all incredibly talented, that we can leverage to help make our games better. You know, I like, and then Bonnie has a bunch of producers and executive producers, and she can help try and make the developers stay as close as possible to schedule with flex that we have built into the system, so that we're flexing at the right time and finishing at the right time. I think the direction is awesome, and I really, I've always loved my job. Maybe it's pretty clear from the stuff we're talking about here and people that have seen me online over the years, but I'm having a blast. It's very fun. So one of the more interesting things that happened while kind of my early first year at Microsoft was the acquisition of Rare. And to step back just a second, when I left Nintendo, it was hard. I mean, there's a lot of people there that I still respect today. They're still all my friends. I still love their games. But the hardest part about leaving Nintendo was walking away from Rare. I love the guys. I love the games they make. I really respect the company. That was tough. So remember, I came over as a director of portfolio planning as my first role at Microsoft. So I didn't really have a whole lot to do with what Ed was doing from a strictly first-party perspective. So they kicked off the whole let's go acquire Rare thing kind of in the background with very few people inside Microsoft knowing what was going on, including me. They came to me maybe a month or so after the talks had started, and maybe as kind of a mid to later step of the due diligence, just asking, what do they really like? They'd been there and visited them, Rare had come, and they were in the building, and I didn't know it when Ed came and talked to me about that. He's like, so we had a talk for about an hour, just over what it was like working with them and what I thought if we were going to acquire them, how should we work with Rare, maybe differently than we work with other companies. I think one of the strengths we have is that we understand each one of our partners has their own place, so to speak, in the game industry. They know how to make games. I mean, Rare knows how to make games. It might be very different than the way Bungie makes games, or the way Bazaar makes games, or the way Lionhead makes games, but they all know how to make games. And so you have to be careful not to come in and meddle with their magic sauce. And so that was a big part of our conversation. And then again, they were acquired, and it was right about then when he asked me also to become the studio manager. And so Rare moved under my studio. Although Tim and Chris and the upper managers were actually reporting directly to Ed. So I was acting more as a peer. But it was good times again. And again, it was nice to have them back. It was really like the closure of the move for me from Nintendo over to Microsoft was that once again I got to work with my buddies at Rare.